It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Welcome here to RealAg Radio on this Tuesday, September 19th. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and we've got a really great show lined up for you. It is absolutely jam-packed with some cool stuff. But before I tell you what's all on today's show, we've got a couple key news stories that we do have to talk about. Just off the top, we did get the inflation numbers out today. So Canada's inflation number jumped back up to 4% in our latest figures. So that's a concern. This is hot on the heels of yesterday, the head of the grocery chains meeting in Ottawa underneath Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's new focus on trying to get food prices down. And there is talk of a tax being leveled against grocers if they can't bring price of food down. Of course, we're going to unpack that in the coming days, as realistically, it's not necessarily just retail that decides how much something costs. And it seems rather problematic to think that adding a tax on retail is not just going to be passed on to consumers. I don't see how that's going to work. Anyway, also on the very serious column, if you've been following along, we have, of course, closely been watching the situation with India. So Canada's Prime Minister was in India a few weeks ago for the G20 meetings. It was not a super great meeting by any stretch. Very icy, did not go well. The Prime Minister's plane was delayed by 2 days getting out of there. We, of course, on Friday's show on the Issues panel discussed at length the importance of trade with India and the importance of getting trade talks back on. Now, after we had that conversation on Friday, it was announced that our Trade Minister, Ng, had actually canceled a trade mission that was slated for early October to India. Now, that, of course, rang some alarm bells as to what on earth is going on. We've now since learned that it's actually far more serious than any of us likely would have ever guessed. So Canada has received information and is now making public that Canada believes and has reason to believe that members of India's own government killed a Canadian on Canadian soil. The Prime Minister stood up in the House of Commons yesterday and made the facts known that the government of India was implicated in the June shooting death of Sikh leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar. It's also since come to light that while Justin Trudeau was in India, intelligence officials from Canada were actually traveling to the UK and have made several trips to India to hash this out, essentially. I'm guessing, and this is speculation, but others are sharing this as well, that this has certainly been brewing for several weeks and definitely was part of the conversation that was happening when our Prime Minister was in India. India's response to the allegations has been, well, rather interesting in that President Narendra Modi has apparently called the accusations absurd and unsubstantiated. He then promptly kicked out a high-ranking Canadian diplomat who has now 5 days to get out of the country. So at this point, everything looks very dire and very stark in diplomatic relations between Canada and India. I'm not by any stretch an expert on these things. However, the full fallout of what this means for trade, what this means for our relationship with India long term, and what it means even for other countries and our partners, the US, the UK, what it means for them going forward potentially also has implications. So we will absolutely be following along with this story as well as we can and try and figure out just what's going on and if we might see any sort of resolution towards trade. I've got to say we could be looking at years, if not decades. All right. We're going to park that for now because we do have a full show lined up. I've got Jennifer Wright of Kark to talk about finding new people to work in agriculture. We've got a product spotlight with New Holland coming up. We've also got a discussion on irrigation districts and on the struggle to find water and to supply water for a full season. And then you'll also hear from Casey Garrett. Casey is with Garrett Industries out of Milestone, Saskatchewan. That company makes equipment specifically for intercropping. and specifically the separation of the two crops post-harvest. It's pretty cool. Of course, if you've got any feedback on today's show, please zip me a line, lsmith@realagriculture.com. You can call that feedback line 1-855-776-6147, or of course, find us across social media at Real Agriculture. All right, let's take a quick break, and I'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
CDC Endure is a new oat line from Alliance Seed. High yielding with excellent disease resistance and the quality end users ask for, all in one great oat variety. CDC Endure provides the high beta-glucan levels to make heart-healthy products like breakfast cereals. For more information on CDC Endure oats, as well as any other products from Alliance Seed, check out allianceseed.com or visit any Alliance Seed authorized retailers.
When it comes to your farm, you demand performance, because what goes in determines what comes out. At Pride Seeds, we deliver on performance. With best-in-class corn hybrid seed, you'll see results when it comes to premium yield in all the ways that matter. Moisture, nutrition, dollars per acre, and of course, tonnage. So discover your farm's advantage, the Pride Seeds advantage. Visit your local dealer or prideseeds.com today.
Introducing the Arion 600 Series tractor by Kloss, where versatility meets productivity head-on, because you've got jobs to do. Mowing, tedding, raking, baling, loading, filling, tilling, cleaning, spreading, hauling, feeding. This is multi-purpose reimagined to do the work for you. It's more than just power. The Arion 600 tractor gets it done.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Tuesday, September 19th. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. Yes, it is Tuesdays with Lyndsey. And this segment is brought to you by DefendYourN.ca. Low-rate NBPT solutions claim to protect nitrogen, but no imitator product delivers like Anvol Nitrogen Stabilizer, the next-gen urease inhibitor from Koch Agronomic Services. See how others stack up to the proven power of Anvol at DefendYourN.ca. Joining me now on the line is Jennifer Wright. She's the Executive Director of the Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council. Jennifer, welcome here.
Thanks so much for having me, Lyndsey.
All right. So first, let's start with kind of paint us a picture of it here on maybe not immediate, but in looking even just to the near future, the amount of roles within the agriculture industry that we're a little concerned we may not be able to fill.
I would say currently there's pretty much every occupation across the agriculture industry is facing a shortage. We are in the process of updating our labor market information, and we'll have that data available early November, which will give us a better real current picture of where we're at. But certainly the industry across the board has been experiencing labor shortage for some time, and we do know that that has only been increasing in the recent years.
Now, I want to dig in a little bit. You've got some really cool new data about perceptions of agriculture and working in agriculture that we're going to dig into a moment. But the CARC, the organization that you lead, has a national workforce strategic plan. What is that? What sort of makes up that strategic plan?
Sure. So the Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council, or CARC, it has been leading a national workforce strategic plan for agriculture and food and beverage manufacturing in partnership with the Canadian Federation of Agriculture and Food and Beverage Canada for almost 2.5 years now. And that strategy is really designed to take a very innovative, different approach to addressing the labor shortages. As I mentioned, the labor shortages have been impacting the industry across the whole value chain for a number of years. We know that it's getting worse. There's been a lot of great work done in the past to identify potential solutions and recommendations and things like that, but we're still seeing that increase in challenges and labor shortages. So the National Workforce Strategic Plan is really a way to bring all of industry together on the same page, to work together in a very action-oriented strategy to address the issue so that we can make change and that we're, in a different place. Our target for the strategy right now is 2030. We know it won't be solved overnight, but if we're all working together through this initiative, we'll be able to really have an impact and make progress and change on our labor shortage issues.
Right. And I mean, you're right. We're not going to solve everything in 7 years or 6.5 or whatever. But I mean, you have to have sort of benchmarks and lines in the sand, right, of a goal to work towards. So now one of the things I think, and we've spoken before and we talk about this within agriculture, of course, is, we need more training, let's say, or we need more, mentorship, or we need, there's all these parts of helping people within the industry. But just recently, you took a step sort of back and actually dug into the perception of agriculture within the workforce. And tell me a bit about some of those findings, because they're quite fascinating. And I'm kind of surprised we haven't asked this question before. But within the workforce, what are some of those perceptions of agriculture?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And one of the reasons that we did this, again, with this workforce strategic plan, it's really taking a look at fully understanding what the barriers are and how we can address them. And certainly we know that a great recruitment and an awareness campaign is not going to solve everything. There's other barriers within, where the locations are, awareness, rural living, that type of thing. But we thought we need to really understand what those perceptions by non-ag people are about those opportunities in agriculture, so that when we do go out to promote all these great opportunities, we're understanding and responding to what perceptions might be out there already. So the research was, in some ways surprising, in some ways kind of confirmed maybe what we thought. But things like, certainly the impressions of the industry from the research, very high. 76% of respondents looked at the industry as in a very or somewhat positive way, and we're really interested in learning about career opportunities. However, when we asked about the career opportunities in agriculture and the type of jobs that there might be, 54% of the respondents could not identify another job in the industry other than a farmer. Very important role in the industry, absolutely. Clearly, probably one of the most important roles in the industry. But when we're trying to attract people to work in agriculture, we need to build awareness about all of the other jobs that are available across the industry.
It does sort of blow my mind. At the same time, I can understand where, and so I don't know if it's how we talk about agriculture or how we talk about farming. Maybe we don't talk enough about, food production and bringing food to the table, but it's shocking to think that many of the respondents couldn't think of another role, but also maybe sometimes we don't think about, a value chain of how food goes from farm to table to think about filling in those gaps. So to me, though, it's a bit daunting to think of how big of a task that might be to help people learn that there are so many other jobs within agriculture.
Absolutely. And it's certainly, again, through this strategy, and having, industry together, working on these issues, it helps with this daunting task. And the more we can help inform the work that industry is doing in this area, hopefully the more impact it will have as well. And we'll be able to change those perceptions more quickly and really raise awareness of the amazing opportunities there are to work across the industry.
And to touch on some of that opportunity as well from the other side, as part of this same survey and line of questioning, of the people that you surveyed, the same amount, 54%, would say they would switch roles, they would switch jobs, and there was interest, as you said, in the agriculture industry. So does that become a focal point moving forward of an action item? Is this something, how do these findings sort of work their way into action?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I guess for the industry, it's, making connections and continue with those people that are interested, taking that next step. I think the great news is that there is that interest and there is a positive perception of the industry as a whole as well. So that's a really good place for us to start. I think organizations like ours, as well as employers and post-secondary institutions working in the industry, will be able to take this and really get their messages out in a way that will hopefully connect better with folks that are looking for work and looking for different careers and different industries. I think also, there's an opportunity with the change in or more interest in food security, where your food comes from, and more openness to looking at living outside of urban Canada, and hopefully these things also can help. Certainly the technology that's being used in modern agriculture as well, I think will really attract, the more we can build awareness around that with those not working in agriculture, the more it will attract people to the industry as well.
So there you go. Here's our homework to everybody: is everyone you talk to, tell them about 3 new jobs in agriculture besides farming. That'll be our challenge to each of you, is to do something like that. All right, Jennifer, this is really fascinating stuff. And certainly, as you said, you'll have the labor market info coming up in November. So I'm sure we'll touch base then. But in the meantime, where can people go for more information about these findings? And of course, more that the Resource Council does.
They can go to our website, which has lots of information. And also, there's going to be a lot of more research coming out through the National Workforce Strategic Plan around, economic impact of temporary farm workers, workplace culture, compensation, all skills, all sorts of things. So that will all be delivered or available through our website. Announcements and information sharing about that will come out through our social media channels as well. We also have a number of new initiatives coming to support employers with HR best practices, on-the-job training for new employees, and some training around bringing on temporary farm workers and understanding the programs, and if you're new to the temporary farm worker program as an employer.
Mm-hmm. All right. And that website is cahrc-ccrha.ca, English and French. There we go. All right. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. We'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground, we are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup, weed control, field trial results, yield strategies, and so much more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF, Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest podcast today.
Kochia sucks.
Big time. And hate it. Really gets in the way. Awful.
But not anymore. Get a head start on tough-to-kill weeds like kochia this fall with Volterra EZ and Fierce EZ soil active herbicide. Apply after harvest before freeze-up for up to 8 weeks of extended control in pulses, soybeans, and wheat next spring. Volterra EZ, Fierce EZ for kochia. Visit newfarm.ca/kochia.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. I am Lyndsey Smith, and joining me for today's Product Spotlight is Aaron Booth. He's the Manager of Product Marketing for New Holland Parts. Aaron, how are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing well. All right. We are, of course, in that very important harvest season, and there's so much to keep track of during harvest. Why should farmers prioritize tractor and combine lubricants at this time of the year?
So what's important this time of year, before you get into harvest, is to be proactive with your maintenance plan. So the last thing, a farmer's going to want during harvest is to need to stop and take a break to either, do some repair that could have been avoided, or to, you've met your service interval and it's time to change engine oil, hydraulic oil. So you want to make sure that you are planning ahead and avoiding unneeded downtime. When it comes to grease, you want to make sure you're, in season using that daily to, again, avoid, being proactive and avoid any kind of failure on your equipment.
So important to look forward, right? To try and anticipate when you might end up having to do some of these changes and try and plan them, not for the thick of harvest season. All right, so now, why should growers select genuine New Holland lubricants for their equipment?
So genuine New Holland lubricants, they go through countless hours of field tests, bench tests, and they are engineered by New Holland engineers to make sure that they are going to hold up to the conditions that our equipment is going through. And it's the only engine oil, hydraulic oil out there that is going to meet the script, or has been validated to meet the specifications for our equipment.
So what makes New Holland engine oil different from others then?
So what's different, I guess to start, what's different about the equipment now is that with emission standards, engines have much tighter tolerances and much higher temperatures. And when you add that to going through harvest and running many, many hours a day, that's putting a lot of pressure on your engine, a lot of potential to wear prematurely. Whereas the New Holland engine oil is really designed to make sure it is going to hold up. So that means it's limiting the amount of oxidation that is happening, the oil degradation, that are two factors that are going to lead to premature wear and engine breakdowns. So, in fact, the New Holland engine oil actually, on average, when we compare it to other engine oils, it has 37% less oxidation that is happening. So, and over the long term, that's just going to mean a longer life for that engine.
And now, what about New Holland's hydraulic transmission oil?
Again, it's similar to the engine oil. It's been tested to work in that piece of equipment and to meet the performance requirements that it needs to meet. The big thing on hydraulic oil, because there's always the opportunity to get water. Our Prima hydraulic oil has a up to 1% water tolerance, which is industry leading. So if there is water introduced into your hydraulics, it's not going to cause issues, rusting, sticking valves, things that can, issues that can become quite expensive. It's going to avoid those.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. All right. Now, are there other products that you'd recommend New Holland equipment owners prioritize during harvest?
Yes. So, first it would be the, extended life OAT coolant, which is another fluid that has been formulated specific for your equipment. So it has the longest kind of service life that you're going to get out of a coolant, meaning you're not going to need to be changing it as often, but it is another product that's going to maximize the life of your engines by making sure it stays cool and doesn't leave harming the deposits. And then second is that New Holland grease. Using that daily in harvest. That's the biggest thing you can do in season to avoid the avoidable failures of your equipment, bearings. And there's a lot of variability when you're in the field. A lot of things you can't control. Things happen, but making sure that you're using grease and daily maintaining that piece of equipment is the one thing you can't control.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. All right, plan ahead and be ready. All right, Aaron, where would you send people if they're looking for more information on these parts and these lubricants?
So for more information online, a good starting point is my.newholland.com. That's going to get you access operators manuals, a lot of different content or information for your equipment. Another good place to go is really just to talk to your local dealer. They're the experts on helping you build out that maintenance plan.
All right. Okay, Aaron, thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you.
We'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
dedication. Watching the sunset over your crop is one of life's simple pleasures. The anticipation of it all. We know that feeling. Introducing our new Airflex NXT, our best honeybee header yet with the closest cut ever. Light, fast reacting, and infinitely adjustable. More yield, less time and work. Airflex NXT focuses on the future. What drives your next? Visit honeybee.ca or contact your nearest honeybee dealer.
The Advancing Women Conference, the National Leadership Conference for Women in Ag, is celebrating 10 years of bringing women in ag together. Whether you're a producer, student, entrepreneur, representative of grower association, or corporate agribusiness, invest in yourself in Niagara Falls on November 19th, 20th, and 21st. Visit advancingwomenconference.ca for more information and to register. Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Tuesday, September 19th. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. Health and safety don't have to be complicated. Tune in to the new Farm Safety Roundup series coming soon. On the first episode, free resources and practical advice for harvest season and rural road safety. All right, joining me now to talk about intercropping and specifically what to do after you've run the combine through a crop that is two or more of different crops in the same field. I've got on the line Casey Garrett of Garrett Industries from just outside of Milestone, Saskatchewan. Welcome here, Casey.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm doing well. All right. So I want to say this is super cool. And what I love about the show is that, we do different interviews on RealAg Radio and people hear, things and then they think, hey, I've got more to add to that. And that's sort of how this came to be because you, Casey, your family business, you actually are manufacturing products that farmers are using specifically, for intercropping and the separation of seed after, which is super cool. But before we dig into sort of that part, just give me a snapshot. What is Garrett Industries? What is it that you offer and fabricate there in Saskatchewan?
Yeah, so Garrett Industries, we're a family-owned and operated business. We operate off our farm at Milestone, Saskatchewan. Here we manufacture various types of grain equipment, from gravity tables, air screen machines, vibrating pre-cleaners, and then we also sell basically any complementary equipment that goes along with our products, like bucket elevators and other types of cleaners and that kind of thing. Is what we do here.
Now, I was lucky enough to sort of get a more in-depth history, and I can't imagine a more Saskatchewan story than yours, in that it really did happen by necessity. That back in the 80s, there was a need. Your farm, your seed cleaning plant had a need for a gravity table, couldn't get one, so decided to build one. And fast forward 20 plus years, and suddenly you're like, hey, this is going to be an actual business we're going to run. So tell me just a little bit about how that came to be.
Yeah, my dad and uncle were they were running a seed plant. Started it in the early 80s. We had a year where we needed to do some upgrading on our crop. They decided a gravity table would probably take care of the problems they had. They went to buy one, couldn't find one in a timely manner, basically. And anyone who knows my dad knows he's pretty aggressive. So he is a builder. So he said, well, somebody built them, why can't we? So he just built one, never intending. Him and my uncle built it, never intending to take it to any further than our own use. The year went by, we got it working. We did the separating we needed to do. It got around a little bit to a few seed grower friends that we'd done this. They had a look at it. They started asking questions whether we could build any more of them. And the following year, I don't believe, was a very good crop. So they built a couple more in the winter, and you just kind of it just kind of went like that.
Yep. Well, it's filling a need, and that's innovation, right? So now fast forward, of course, now, part of why we're talking today is about intercropping. And so, your company certainly supplies some of the equipment that farmers are quite interested in that key part of the intercropping process. Of course, so you've got two crops growing on the same acre. You're going to harvest them, but very shortly after, you do need, obviously, to separate them out between the two. And so, from your perspective, what have farmers come to you with? What are they most interested in as far as equipment goes to deal with that very important process of separating seed?
Yeah, so they come to us and they've got together a way to separate them. So most commonly what we end up providing to them is one of our vibratory pre-cleaners, because they are such a simple machine and they're a fairly low to get started with. And they have precision screens in them that are changeable very quickly, and we do stock a wide selection of screens, so we can usually outfit them with what they need to get these crops separated. So they generally start like that. And what happens though is sometimes producers like what they've done with the intercropping, and then they go on a little bigger scale. And once they do that, they start wanting to talk about bigger capacities and possibly more abilities with the machine. So we have built one prototype. It's an intercropping, specifically for intercropping. It's actually being tested currently, but we're not completely happy with that design. As we speak, we're actually working on a little different design. I think we're pretty confident in what we've got on the drawing board, and I expect we can probably have a prototype of that. Is what we're shooting for producers to have a look at, and it'll be significantly higher capacities and a lot more capability with that machine than what we currently are offering for that industry.
Yeah, so with the vibratory pre-cleaner, so it's sort of a gateway sort of piece of equipment as I sort of understand it. Now I'm going to expect is there a range of capacity even for that piece of equipment that farmers who are maybe, curious about intercropping but haven't gone sort of whole hog, is that still a pretty decent piece of equipment to have? Oh,
yeah. We have two models of that, and these were actually started as a pre-cleaner for seed plants, but they've kind of got the eye of the intercropping guys. And we have two models. We have one that takes a 24-inch wide screen, and they're 2 long and 2 layers deep, and then we offer one in a 32-inch wide screen, same configuration. We have a range of capacities that are achievable depending on what you're trying to do and what crops you're trying to separate. Certainly crops that are significantly different in size separate quicker than the ones that are closer in size. So, it can range anywhere from 200 bushels an hour on a smaller machine up to, 300 up to 700 or 800 sometimes. That would be at the outside what we're capable of.
Mm-hmm. And so that then is where the prototype you're working on is sort of coming into play as it really boosts the capacity part. So I guess my question is, I'm going to guess this is, of course, farmer feedback. This is customer feedback wanting something larger capacity. Is that really how you sort of figure out what's going to work, what you build next? Is it very much that feedback loop?
Absolutely. We listen to what the customers are asking for, and basically that's what's driving us to design the machine we're working on now. It'll have actually up to 4 product streams coming out of the machine if you require that. So what that'll do is it'll let you actually partly clean the product. So it'll let you take the larger product away, like the scalpings, which would be undesirable to have in the sample. It'll also let you take some undersized product out, like would be typically dockage, and then get your 2 crops separated in the same pass. Okay.
Now that sounds great. It sounds slightly complicated. So, how many iterations? I mean, this is what your company does, so I'm fascinated by it. But as you said, you're close to a prototype you figure you're happy with. How many iterations has sort of this gone through to get to where you're pretty confident you're just about there?
Probably about 3, I think we'd be at. We did the one machine it is running, but it's just not quite where we weren't quite happy with it. And, previous to that, we were doing the smaller vibratory pre-cleaners. So we've had a couple shots at it here to get to where we're going to go with it, but we're pretty confident in what we're working on right now. One of the challenges with intercropping is traditional seed cleaning equipment does certainly do the separating, but the problem is it's designed to only take a small portion out of the mainstream of product, where in intercropping you can have up to 50% of both products. So what happens then is the conveyance of the product that would be typically undesirable in normal seed cleaning, the capacities aren't there to get that away from the machine. So that's where probably the biggest challenge comes from.
Right. And it's a really good point you make, because, often when we think about cleaning seed, whatever seed it is, the bulk of the product is all going one way and some product goes the other, right? Screenings or whatever. But really, like you've mentioned, you could be looking at half and half. So that's a lot more volume for the machine to be doing of the selection process.
That's correct, yeah. And so typically you can't get away is what happens.
Right. So, so your more typical or commercial stuff that's out there, that's why a company like yours can specialize in this stuff. So I guess that's one of my other questions is now you're based in Saskatchewan. There's quite a bit of intercropping happening there. Obviously you have equipment that is being used, outside of that realm. But where do you find your biggest demand for some of these more specialized products? Is it there home in Saskatchewan, or how big is your range for where you're selling some of these?
Basically we do sell all over North America, but our biggest market, of course, is on the prairies, at home here. And then we do a fair bit of business into the northern U.S., into the Dakotas and Minnesota, and a little bit into Montana is our primary area we do most of our business.
Now, Casey, assuming things go well, and fingers crossed that they do, where and when might people see this latest iteration?
So probably the best chance would be probably next year at Farm Progress Show in Regina, or potentially Ag in Motion in July. Would probably be the best shot at seeing it. I don't think we'll have it ready for the January, the fall and winter shows. I really doubt we'll have a prototype that we want to take to a show at that point yet.
Okay. But look for it potentially June, July next year at one of those shows. All right. Very cool.
For sure.
All right, Casey, I appreciate this very much, and it's very cool. And thanks for reaching out, because that's we really appreciate having the back and forth of what else is out there. So have yourself a great day, and thanks for joining me on the show.
Thanks, Lyndsey.
We'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
At Brett Young, we focus on what's real. It's how we became Canada's largest independent seed company. That's why we're asking a real farmer, what do you think of BY6217TF, Brett Young's TrueFlex Canola Hybrid?
What's that?
BY6217TF, Brett Young's TrueFlex Canola Hybrid with Pod Defender shatter reduction technology and Defender-rated club root and blackleg resistance.
Good yield, yeah. Probably choose it again.
Thanks, Chris. Talk to your Brett Young retailer today to see for yourself. Brett Young, distinct by design.
Boron is an essential micronutrient for plant growth, and without boron, your crops can't absorb the macronutrients they need for higher yields. Although borates occur naturally, boron deficiency is a common soil problem. Whether in direct soil application, through fertigation, or as a foliar spray, US Borax has the right refined product for your crops. US Borax products are specifically formulated to combine with other fertilizers, lowering your application costs. Learn more at borax.com/ag.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Tuesday. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by New Holland Engine Oil. If you aren't putting the best in, how can you expect the best out? Your equipment's engine oil is a prime example. Only New Holland Engine Oil is engineered specifically to protect your New Holland equipment for the work ahead. Visit your New Holland dealer to learn more. All right. Well, we have certainly covered at length this year the fact that we've had an incredibly dry season for the Canadian prairies and, of course, huge parts of the United States. A big part of that, of course, is it leads to a lack of water. Now, if you're dependent on what falls from the sky, there's not much you can do about that. But In certain parts, of course, of the U.S. and pretty small areas of Canada, you rely on irrigation. Now, for southern Alberta, there's actually quite a few acres, and I mean thousands upon thousands, and our feedlot system in southern Alberta that rely on irrigation districts to supply the water that they need to grow a crop and, of course, to prepare for the year ahead. Now, these irrigation districts have to, of course, get the water from somewhere. So where does it come from? Well, a large part of it actually comes from snowmelt that comes out of the mountains. But it turns out that an early snowmelt can actually mean that that water isn't captured by the irrigation districts and can still mean a very tight season ahead. That's what we saw here in 2023. And Kara Oosterhuis is joined now by David Westwood. He's with the St. Mary Irrigation District. And they have a conversation now about the timing of that snowmelt, why it's so important, and what some of the challenges have been for the irrigation districts this year in southern Alberta.
Hey, Kara Oosterhuis here with RealAgriculture.com. As the 2023 harvest is well underway across Western Canada, that too means the irrigation season has come to an end or is in the process of coming to an end. Joining me today to discuss is David Westwood, who is the General Manager of the St. Mary River Irrigation District. David, thanks so much for joining me today. Do you want to just talk about the St. Mary River Irrigation District, or as more commonly known, the SMRID, for those aren't familiar? How many acres does it cover?
Good morning, Kara, and thank you very much for having me on. The St. Mary River Irrigation District irrigates just over 500,000 acres now after that we've amalgamated with the former Tabor Irrigation District. So we are the largest irrigation district within Alberta and within Canada, and I've received some information that I believe we're the largest in North America now, including the U.S. For 500,000 acres, to give a visual, would be basically everything a little south and a little bit of west of Lethbridge, Alberta, just south of the Old Man River, and basically all the way through the Highway 3 corridor to Medicine Hat. That's the area that we cover.
So where does the water come from?
The majority of our water comes from the Rocky Mountains, both from the Canadian side, and it fills up reservoirs that are owned by Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation at Waterton and Belly Reservoir, and then a significant amount comes from the Rocky Mountains, but south of the border through the International Joint Commissions and our treaty that we have with the U.S., water that comes up from the St. Mary River, and hence the name of our district, comes up and ultimately feeds the St. Mary Reservoir, which is located just a little north of Cardston.
Let's talk about the 2023 season. You know, there was definitely, it was a tricky season across the board. We're on multiple years of drought here. Talk about some of the struggles.
Yes, it was a very challenging year for us for a couple of reasons. One was we did not have the water supply that we would like to have, I guess, or on an average year that we would typically see. And that was basically due to lower snowpack that had developed in the Rocky Mountains over the last winter. It was definitely below average. We monitored all winter long, and the accumulation was just not as high as we've seen in a typical average year. And so we started the season with lower supply, for lack of a better word, and we went into last winter okay within the reservoirs within the St. Mary River Irrigation District. The Headworks reservoirs, particularly St. Mary Reservoir, which is the largest, was definitely not at its full winter supply and never did reach its full supply limit this summer. So the challenge right out of the gate was we didn't have as much supply as we'd like. Then on top of that, you had very, very dry drought conditions. After a very little bit of a late start, just by about a week or two due to some snowfall around Easter time, district quickly switched to heat. And if you remember, in this part of the world, southern Alberta, we had above 30 degrees or around 30 degrees temperatures the May long weekend. That's not very common in southern Alberta. You usually get rain on the May long weekend, especially for the campers. They're always disappointed in that. So what we saw was instant irrigation demand because of that heat. They were ready to get in the field, and they wanted to start obviously irrigating what they had seeded. But the demand then never subsided because the heat continued. And I've got some information, or was forwarded some information from Alberta agriculture and irrigation. And I'm obviously coming from Alberta environment, that this, in southern Alberta, this is the sixth driest year on record for precipitation since January 1st, and in sixth driest in the past 99 years. And that would even include some of the Dust Bowl days of the 1930s. So that really puts it in perspective for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been dry, and like you say though, it had to do with snowpack as well. How does melting play into this too? You know, that snowpack has to melt at the right time as well.
That's very good. I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, typically because of cooler evenings in the spring and also just cooler temperatures in the spring, the snowpack remains intact. And what we would normally see in a typical summer is that snowpack not completely melting off until, I would say, early into July. This year, due to those warm temperatures in the spring, the snowpack was almost completely melted by basically end of May, early June, about a month ahead of schedule. And that obviously did not, provide us reserves to help continue to augment water to be able to fill the upstream reservoirs later in the season. So what we had was what we got very early on, and then couple that with heavy demand, and then lack of any meaningful rainfall due to the drought conditions really led to, significant pressures on our system in the sense of high demand and obviously not as much supply as we'd like to have. But I would like to point out that I think the system that obviously was devised by early engineers worked extremely well to, do what it was supposed to do in a year like this, where we had, maybe not as much water as we'd like to be able to provide, but still adequate water. We ended up at a 13-inch per acre allocation, and the crops in southern Alberta, for those who are growing irrigated crops, are looking very good, and yields are quite good this summer. So it did, the reservoir system did its job.
And 13 inches, is that about average?
A little lower. I would say in the last few years, our normal typical allocation has been anywhere from 16 to 18 inches per acre. So definitely, we started the year at 15, and we ended up having to make two cuts down to 13 inches because when we kept realizing what we had left for supply and where demand had started and stayed, that we were in a position that we were, not going to be able to supply at the original 15-inch allocation, and that we would, looked like we were on our way to running out. So we cut back to make sure we could at least meet demand through, lengthening, going a little bit longer into the summer. Due to the fact that we have short supply as well, we've had to shorten our season a little bit as well, and September 22nd will be the last day of irrigation within the St. Mary River Irrigation District, and that's usually, I'd say a couple weeks earlier than normal. We normally shut around the Thanksgiving weekend on October. It's usually about the second weekend in October.
As a part of this, farmers were also asked to consider not fall irrigating. This was all due to reservoir levels?
Yes, just basically due to what we had for storage. They were asked to really consider whether it was necessary. We wanted to make sure the water we had available was going towards harvesting and or irrigating crop. That was either going to be designed for cover crop or somebody who, planted a winter or wheat or barley crop, or they needed irrigation to be able to harvest, which obviously those that do certain specialty crops like potatoes and sugar beets, they like to be able to make sure the ground's at least moist enough that when they're going to do their harvest, they don't damage their, the product when they're harvesting it up.
What do reservoir levels look like?
By far, we will not reach our desired winter storage levels that we like to go into winter with. We always keep them, lower than full supply because we anticipate getting lots of precipitation events and anticipate next year's spring runoff from the snowmelt, but we're definitely lower than our target winter levels. We will definitely be looking or hoping for a very, strong and above average snowpack if we're going to be able to come back to some sort of average levels for next year, but we're just going to have to watch what happens throughout the winter. It might not all be to snow, too. We've had some fortunate events, most recently in the fall of 2021 after that intense summer of the heat dome summer. We saw some fantastic, after, precipitation events right after the irrigation season ended in October, but before winter set in. There was some great heavy wet snowfalls in late October, and that all turned into water very, very quickly, and we were able to capture that within the system, and that really helped us going into the winter season. But, don't know if we'll have, a fortunate event like that again, but we'll just have to see what kind of precipitation in total that we get throughout the winter.
Do you want to talk a bit about how vital access to water is for some crops in the area? It's such a unique zone, this Palliser Triangle we're in, and there's a lot of unique crops grown under irrigation. Without irrigation, they probably would not be here.
Oh, absolutely. Obviously, in southern Alberta, there's still a mix of dry land, but we're heavily irrigated and throughout southern Alberta, and that was, really designed to be able to grow crops because you cannot count on steady precipitation levels to be able to make sure that you could have, good yields on a year-by-year basis. But irrigation truly has transformed the type of crops from the earlier settler days where they were mainly cereals until now we grow a lot of specialty crops. But some of those are definitely take a little bit more water, and I point to sugar beets and potatoes, but there's other interesting crops that are being grown in southern Alberta, such as mint and hemp and those kind of things that just would not be grown if irrigation wasn't available.
Absolutely. Okay, anything else you would like to add about the 2023 irrigation season?
The only thing I'd like to add is that it proves that irrigation is really a lifeblood, not just for the agriculture community, but obviously for the spin-off that comes from that byproduct, for obviously all the value-added food processing that comes from the producers, and then the communities along the, now branded Canada's premier agri-food corridor from Lethbridge to Medicine Hat. And we were very pleased with how our system performed in these lower, supply year, with not obviously having as much storage we want, but the storage that we have still was able to produce good crops. But it's reaffirming that one of our projects, the multiple projects that we're doing under the Alberta Irrigation Modernization Program of converting more open canal conveyance into underground pipelines, which leads to efficiencies, which will lead to us to be able to expand in the future, and then particularly the expansion of Chin Reservoir, so that when we have events like storm events in years where we have too much precipitation, the more storage we have and that we can capture, then will definitely help in a year like this where we don't get as much precipitation, and we'd be able to augment the demand for irrigation.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time. And yeah, like I said, crossing our fingers and hoping for the best to happen over the winter here, and looking forward to 2024 already.
Yes, we're going to have a hopefully positive that it's going to be a great season for the skiers because we're going to have an abundance of snow. That's what we're hoping for.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you very much for your time, David.
Thank you, Kara.
And with that, we've reached the end of today's show. Big thank you to all of my guests, of course, to Jennifer Wright, to Casey Garrett, to David Westwood and Kara Oosterhuis for joining me as well. And of course, Aaron Booth with New Holland for our product spotlight. Okay, so big show today. We covered a lot. Certainly, we'll be keeping you up to date on all the news on trade with India. This is certainly a developing story. We're learning a lot today, and I can't even try to capture it all, of course, but we've done our best. Stay tuned, of course, throughout the week. We'll be updating you, and we'll be tackling this, of course, on the issues panel on Friday. Your regular host, Sean Haney, is back for tomorrow's show, of course, looking at the market, so stay tuned for that as well. If you've got feedback on today's show, you can call that RealAg feedback line, 1-855-776-6147, or you can zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. And of course, Real Agriculture is across social media at Real Agriculture. You can find us on X, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Okay, it's been an absolute pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much for listening to the show. I'll be back on Friday with the issues panel. Talk to you then.